Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation because this episode is part of a Launch, Grow, Thrive series with Dr. John Wilson. For those of you who might not be familiar with John, he is an entrepreneur, a professor at Drexel University, and the host of EntreProfessor. But more importantly, it is an honor and privilege to call him a business mentor and a friend. Let's dive in. John, welcome back to the Stories with Traction podcast.
It's great to be back, Matt. Thanks for having me back.
I appreciate your willingness to do a series with us, and I want to do a recap of the last episode we did together. So we touched on elements of what you do, learn, grow, thrive, and working with entrepreneurs all over the country on how do they take ideas, expand them, commit to specific actions that lead to growth, and then ultimately them thriving as an organization. There are three things that we touched on in the last episode that had great meaning to me. You had touched on the elements of build, measure, learn from a loop perspective. You called it the build, measure, learn loop, as far as putting something out in the world and then figuring out how to properly measure and learn from it so you can fine tune it so the product and or service continues to get better once they go through this process. After that, you talked about having pivot or persevere meetings, trying to figure out at what point do we put something back on a shelf and walk away for the time being, or at what point do we continue to persevere and continue to invest and go through the stress to bring something to market. And then the third and final piece that I got a lot out of from our last conversation was you mentioned about bringing other people into the systems that you've built that are not emotionally connected to it, so that they can figure out, hey, this system needs to be shattered and a new system needs to be built in order to lead to more growth. So I appreciate everything that you shared, and I want to dive much deeper into the grow phase of an organization. Now, here's how I want to start this. A lot of people listening know that I'm a Philly guy, a Philly sports fan through and through. So I am a Philadelphia Eagles fan. And for anyone that follows the Eagles, you know Jason Kelce, the last center for the Eagles, is a huge hero in the city of Philadelphia. And the Kelces put out a documentary not too long ago. And there was a moment in the documentary, I'll never forget this. In fact, I remember while I was watching it, I was getting teared up, where Jason Kelce, so think of this is his life dream of being in the NFL, and he gets to the point of being one of the best centers, arguably in NFL history. I mean, it's yet to be seen about Hall of Fame status and what's going to come in the years ahead, but definitely one of the top tier centers. And there's this moment where he needs to figure out, when do I need to walk away from football? Because I don't know if I'm going to be able to hang out with my grandkids. I don't know if I'm going to even be able to talk and connect with them because of how many times his head's been hit. Right. So I'll never forget. I'm watching the documentary. I'm tearing up thinking, like, here's a guy incredibly passionate about what he's done. He's reached the peak of success in the pro sports world. And he's trying to figure out, do I have a couple more years in me, or do I walk away? Because as a lot of people listening know, he was old from a center perspective, right? So there's a certain point in the NFL, you have an expiration date, right? So he decided to make that hard decision and figure out that moment to walk away. Now, here's why I bring this up, because there's a lot of businesses that I've seen traveling all over the United States. I've spoken in 30 states so far, worked with every industry that people can imagine. I try to calculate, in the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to speak with over 3,000 CEOs. What's amazing is a lot of them build their business to an element of profit, but they're literally dying inside due to stress. Okay. And I hear from a lot of them, tons of sleepless nights, numerous nervous breakdowns. Some of them have major health complications. And it's almost like that Jason Kelsey situation where very successful, but yet needs to figure out like how I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore because I'm getting hit in the head too many times. I want to still live. And how many CEOs will get their business to the point where, yes, growth's taking place, they're making profit, but their lives, they're literally dying inside. They're in a state of hell. The stress is so overwhelming. It's like, who on earth would want a business like this? So, John, I want you to take us through today what growth looks like, but what it looks like to actually have a little bit of peace of mind. How do we go from profit to peace of mind? So what would be some things that you would take a CEO through that I'm sure many of what you listen to this episode where they are stressed and burnt out? What would be a couple things that they need to be thinking of and then commit to action to do to go from that profit to peace of mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and my model goes launch, grow, thrive. And so often a founder or CEO will want to hire me to talk about thrive because all the things you just said, stressed out, anxious, burned out, feeling like the things that are really important in life, health, family are, getting pushed to the side. And even feeling some guilt about that. But a lot of times it's like to even get to the point to be ready to talk about thrive, you have to really finish well the grow phase. And a lot of times what happens is a business goes from we've got an idea, we've launched, we've found customers, we've got that customer validation, we've found validation in terms of the operations, we've got things are, generally we're delivering to customers effectively, maybe even financial validation. So the business is making profit, it's making money, the revenue's coming in, costs are controlled, there's profit coming in. But the owner, the person at the top, is still just deeply involved in everything. And as a result, without them, nothing can happen. And their life is looking like you described, really, really miserable because they're just so deeply embedded. So one of the first things I say is you got to get out of your business. And before you can do that, you have to have that grow phase complete to the point that you have the right strategy for the business, not just for now and next year, but for looking out forward. You have to have the right leadership team in place that leadership team has implemented and is operating all of the systems, processes, and procedures. They're doing that well. But you also have a good talent system where you have the right people are coming into the organizations, you're putting them in the right place, you're growing and developing them, and they're then really making that operating system work. And that's all needing to happen in a way that doesn't require that first leader to be involved in everything. So that first thing is really making sure those systems are giving them the space to be able to step away from it.
So it it makes me think of a gentleman I spoke to recently where this individual started a business. So he was in that launch phase. The business grew and grew. It is a very profitable business. In fact, many people on the outside would point to it and say, that's a highly successful business. It took him 8 years before he could go on his first vacation. And then when he went on vacation, he got a call from someone in the organization, and it was a situation that he felt that he had to deal with. So he literally, basically what happened was he flew to another state to get away with his wife on quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, vacation. And he spent time in his hotel working the whole time. So I want to go back to get out of your business. How could someone like that even get out of their business? They can't even get out of the state to go on this was not even a week. This was an extended weekend vacation. And he literally spent the time in his hotel room working the whole time. So how can someone like that get out of their business?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the hardest things is, you have to look at the psychology of the individual. Like, why have they made themselves so indispensable in the process? Because a lot of times that's one of the first fundamental questions is, are they able to let go? Are they able to bring in a strong number two? Are they able to stand up a strong leadership team and then empower them and release them to run the system and really relinquish a lot of the control, the specific engagement that is characteristic right in that moment? And it's almost like until that happens, that person's going to be feeling that stress. And, it's so important to figure it out because I call it, the principle of, or the rule, or whatever you want to call it, it's like 168. Every human has 168 hours every week. And this is really the fundamental opportunity cost of life. We can talk about money in the bank. You can talk about, all these, different investments, those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, time is the one thing that we never get back. We have 168 hours this week, and when they're over, they're gone forever. And when you think about the people in your life that are important, when you think about the experience of your life, being able to achieve what you want to, and to be able to have that good experience, that's the limiting factor. And if you're using too many of those hours every week just to keep the business running, it's going to take a terrible toll. So this is where I would say it starts with hiring the strong number two. And whether that's an executive vice president, whether it's a chief operating officer. I remember my first 4 clients all got to a point where they added a whole 0 to their company's revenue. And one of the things that they all did around the same time, and I think a lot of, through my prompting, they hired their first chief operating officer. So these were, smaller companies growing. Most companies have a chief operating officer, but if the senior leader is not allowing them to operate really as a true number two, then they're not able to take that noise away. And there's a book called "Make the Noise Go Away" that really does a nice job of kind of illustrating this in a kind of a little anecdote. It can be hokey at times, but it basically gives this story of, it's a founder of a company that's grown it to be a large company now, the CEO. And the COO, they come together for a weekend, and they spend the weekend really reflecting on what happened when this chief operating officer successfully made the noise go away for the owner. And they're talking about, we actually can step out of the office for a couple of days to build this model out. And, they talk about they each had a vacation. They each talked about doing things that they like to do. But in particular, the owner was never in that position before this person stepped into place. So really having that person that's able to almost operate the company like the owner is going to do it, to take care of all those things, but free the owner up so that they can focus on either re-entering the business where they most want to be, or they can start to move away from the business. And that could come in a couple of different forms. One could be they start to just think much bigger picture. Maybe I want to go start a different company, or maybe I want to expand this company in a new way that needs to be separated from the current operations. Or it's time to really move on. Is it time to turn it over to professional management? Is it time to retire? Is it time to just, experience more of life?
So you said something I wanna expand. You mentioned that let go piece. So I share with you that story of the individual. It took 8 years to get on vacation, and then he gets on vacation and he's in his hotel room the whole time. I could share story after story after story with you, and I'm sure people listening have stories of their own where they can't get away. And one of the things that you mentioned is get out of your business, let go. And when you said let go, part of me was thinking, is it so hard to let go because it's tied to maybe early childhood trauma of learning not to trust people, and then someone got in a situation where they learned that they can't trust people? It has to be on them. Yeah. And if so, how do they get over that? Because what I see is a lot of companies people will get in that launch phase that we talked about in the last episode. They get in the launch phase, and one of the reasons why they're doing that is because they want freedom, right? They don't want to work for anyone else. They want that freedom. And then they end up growing a little bit, and then sometimes even a lot, and they become slaves to their business. There's no freedom. There's no freedom at all. In fact, they've taken on 30, 40 bosses because they feel that they're beholden to their clients, and then they're wearing 50 different hats in their company. They're stressed out beyond belief. So I want to tap more into that let go piece. How do you convince someone to trust someone in a COO seat? Or where does that trust factor come in?
Yeah, the trust factor to me is really where it starts. Is, first of all, can they trust their leadership team? So to me, it's like, you can't just hire a leadership team and say, go run the business. They may not be equipped. They may not even be competent for that role. So part of it is, having the right team in place in the systems. But the real meat of this, or the real what's behind it, is what you're pointing to, which is the psychology of the individual is a much harder part. There's half a dozen or more really well-known, I'll call them franchise operating system models, where it's like, we've got a cookie cutter system, and if you put this in place, all your problems are going to go away. Well, what I have found in cases where I've had to help companies rethink what they were trying to do with a system like that, is what I found is it's not that the system was bad or didn't work. It may not have been right for them. It may not have been the right system for them, because it's oftentimes kind of a hammer chasing a nail. But it's a lot of times it's the leader actually didn't let the system do what it was supposed to do. And it was because, you've named a number of different things. It could be that they just really feel like they need to be in control. Their formative years may have been feeling very out of control, and so now they're trying to compensate for that. Or it could be trust. It could be that they feel like they've surrounded themselves with people that will do work, but they can't just hand over work to them. They may have the wrong people in those roles, or they may not have those people in a place where they really own the systems to the point that they can be let go. So I like to think of it this way: if a CEO or an owner or founder has 1,000 headaches a day, they need to figure out how to make 999 of those headaches belong to their leadership team. That means establishing clear lines of accountability. That means having systems that make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, and having people in those roles that are trusted enough that the person can just hand it to them and say, I'm leaving this in your hands, and I know you have it. But if they don't have that confidence, it would be foolish to let go in that situation.
So you mentioned 1,000 headaches. It brings me back to that story of Jason Kelsey. Like, he had to come to a point in his career to say, I have another year or two left in me. I could continue to play, but I could get however many more concussions, and then I won't be able to function as a person a decade from now. Like, he had to come to grips with that. And I feel that's spot on with what we're talking about from a CEO perspective on, is it worth the stress that someone's going through? Is it worth major health deterioration? Is it worth the sleepless nights? You have to get that. You mentioned hiring the strong number two. You have to get that strong number two in the seat. So let's talk about that, because you mentioned systems. So what is a system someone could set up to start bringing on a COO and getting the person in the seat, and then creating that system, those lines of communication to pass off some of these, like you had mentioned, headaches?
Yeah. Well, I think I would first start with the people. First of all, it's, is the COO complementary to the CEO? And I think the COO, it's incumbent upon them to understand, is this person going to empower, equip, and release me? Or are they going to override? Are they going to interfere? Are they going to stay engaged? And really, that conversation is not one conversation. It's a series of conversations, often facilitated, ideally, in a way that really draws out the understanding and expectation. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, it goes back to really analyzing the organization in terms of, are the right systems in place? Are they doing what they need to do? In the last episode, we talked a bit about taking that step back and redesigning the operating system from a blank sheet of paper, knowing what we deliver today and who we deliver it to. What is the system we would design today, and do that comparison to see, if we were designing this optimized system, why is it different from what we're doing today? Are there things we're doing now that could be deleted? Are there things that could be redone? Are there technologies available today that weren't available 5, 10, 15 years ago that could change the way we approach this? How would a startup approach this? Really getting to that point where it's clear where the operating system is working, where it needs to be. And then, in terms of the individuals, starting to get really clear on, what does success look like running the day-to-day operation? What are the key performance indicators? What are the metrics? And what are those systems, processes, and procedures that need to be operated? How do we make sure those are happening all the time, to the point that the senior leader doesn't have to think about them anymore, because that COO, that number two, that's become their headache. And those accountabilities, they've signed on to say, I own this, and I will make sure that it's never your headache, because it'll be my headache.
It's interesting, John, because before we hopped on the call, I was rattling off a list of companies to you. And I said, this company, 500 people here, 600 people here, and sharing with you elements of revenue that they had amassed. They got to that point. And what's interesting is, back to your point, they waited way too long to get a COO, or some of them still don't have that COO spot filled. So can you share with us maybe a success story or two with companies that you've worked with, where maybe they fight you on that notion of, no, I don't want a COO. I don't feel like I could trust anyone. I don't know how that would even work. John, I can't even get away for a weekend to try to figure out who or how to bring someone on like that. But then they do it, and then it works out really well for them. Can you think about maybe a company or two in particular that they went through that process with you?
Yeah, I can think of quite a few. In fact, a lot of times what I've seen happen is the COO comes in, they start to try to systematize things, and the owner, the founder, is like, no, 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 I still want to do it this way, or want to do it that way, and then there ends up being this conflict. And I can think of a situation where there was a lot of conflict in these roles because the owner wasn't really ready to let go and wanted to be involved. And then the challenge for the COO is they're trying to move away from just doing things that are, the owner just being able to do what they want to do, and they want to like systematize it the way others can do it. So, in that case, the first conversation was really around, at what point is the number two able to just make a decision and know that they are empowered to do that and know they can do that, and really like writing out those criteria. So work boarding just what are the criteria to say what's in scope, what decisions can be made, which ones can't, where are the hot buttons. And then, to me, it's like when you have those hot button things, I think those are like the pushback or the challenge needs to be, and this is much more easily done with a third party facilitator, to the owner. Why do you feel like you still want control of that or need control of that? And digging into that, because a lot of times it's like, those are the things say, I still want to maintain control of that. Those are probably the things that are most making it difficult to move to an operating system that could be run by and controlled by others.
Is the still wanting control based on emotional attachment to that? And if so, how can someone step away and create distance from that emotional attachment?
Yeah. I think one of the things you said early on is this is somebody who started a business so they could do things however they wanted, right? They wanted to be running their own show. They didn't want to be working for someone else, contributing to somebody else's system. They wanted to be the one that was actually driving things forward and doing things their own way. And so what happens in that case, especially if someone's highly visionary, they're out there kind of pursuing the vision, and it's kind of like whatever's happening today. Well, my vision is a little different, so I'll just start doing that now. And then all of a sudden, it's broken systems that were there to kind of take pressure off of them. And if they see things not going exactly right, feeling like they need to get back involved. A great example I think of, I share this story with founders frequently that are struggling with this. If you've ever seen the series Band of Brothers, follows it was a lieutenant winners at the beginning, and by the end it's major winners, and really follows his journey through the Second World War. And there's this point, each along the way getting promoted to higher levels of leadership. Very talented leader, at least it is depicted in the story. And at the point that the promotion to major takes place, there's a skirmish going on. He's overseeing it, and he sees the team just getting decimated. And in a moment, he's always been a great tactician, grabs a rifle, starts to head into the battle, and he literally feels himself get jerked back by his collar by the general, who says, "Stand down, Major." He said, "This is not your job anymore to go into the fight. You never pick up a rifle again. You need to send in your orders and trust your team." And so it was this moment where, it's like he's being not just challenged, he's being ordered to like stand down, because the role of that senior leader is not to get involved even when things are going sideways. It's to let the team learn. It's to let the leadership structure do what it's built to do.
Wow, that's a powerful story. I appreciate you sharing that. All right, so let's say someone listening to this episode, they're going to do what you're saying, John. They're going to get out of their business, they're going to let go, they're going to hire a strong number two, so they have that COO in the seat. Where do they go from there? Next step.
I think the big thing is not turning everything over immediately. That's the one thing I actually saw this one time where someone brought a COO, dumped everything on their desk, and they assumed like, okay, now I can go on and move on to other things. And that's just a recipe for disaster. It's number one, it wasn't fair to the COO, it wasn't fair to the owner. It wasn't the right expectation. So really putting that system in place together, working in lockstep to let that integrator do what they do, but at the same time, working to make sure, checking the understanding of here are the kind of the day-to-day things that need to happen. Here's what we need to happen on a consistent, regular basis. Here are the bigger goals and the bigger objectives we need to meet. And then also from an innovation perspective and a moving forward perspective, do we have a way to make this business self-sustaining, a system that's also moving things forward, not getting stuck in doing things the same way over and over. And what I usually say is the thing to do now is find the 5 to 10 people in the organization that are absolutely indispensable. And the reason I say that is indispensable people are wonderful people that are doing great work. In fact, they're often as stressed as the owner because they're working so hard. But these are individuals in the organization that are actually making it hard to put systems in place because it's so easy to let them keep doing what they're doing. And that's one of the first things that an integrator or a strong number two needs to do is figure out where these kind of people solutions are happening rather than repeatable systems, because that's going to interfere with the ability to grow consistently over time.
Isn't that incredibly dangerous to have 5 to 10 people in an organization that if they walk, the company would erode? Isn't that like incredibly dangerous?
Very dangerous. Well, and there's insurance policies, critical person insurance policies for exactly that reason. It's like, and so anytime you have a critical person, and in a sense, the owner in this case has kind of created that hero culture where, well, I'm always involved in everything. They've set that example. And so others have stepped up to kind of follow that example. And so now, you have a few people that, if they get upset and leave, if they win the lottery, any number of things could happen. Their circumstances change. Now, all of a sudden you've lost this critical piece of your whole operating system, as well as the institutional knowledge they have. And so, these are the kind of things that until that's addressed, that owner founder can't just step away, even if you have a really good, strong number two. So the strong number two's job is to go find those people, not displace them, but build the systems to do what they're doing. And they can continue to operate those systems, but move away from just doing it whatever way they have kind of found to just be good for them, but also causes a dependency on them.
I think that is incredible advice. Build the systems to do what they're doing. At what point should a company get a COO? Is it revenue driven? Is it headcount driven? At what point does a company say, hey, I should get a strong number two?
I would say as early as possible once you're past the launch stage. So in the launch stage of the business, you're trying to figure out what the business is. And so any assumption, there's no sacred assumptions at that point. If this is the way we do customer service, if there's a different way we need to do that to get the result we need, we're going to change it. So you don't want things structured and in place. But at the point where it's really clear who the customer is, how you bring them value, and how you get paid for that value, at that point, the earlier you can bring in that strong number two to say, okay, almost like give them the first headache to give them is figure out how you would do this in an optimal way if you were starting from scratch, and start that whole process. And then implement those systems. So, and in some ways, like the longer an owner or founder waits before they bring in that strong number two, the harder it is to rebuild those systems in a way that no longer require the owner and the founder to be in the mix.
Can a company bring on a COO too soon?
I think the main way a company could bring a COO on too soon would be if the owner isn't really committed yet to the idea of a strong number two that's really going to run the company. I think the other time that it could be too soon is just when the company financially can't handle it yet. So if the visionary owner really knows where they want to go, what they want to do, they have a big vision, but they don't really have the capacity yet to deliver that vision. It could be bringing in a COO that is maybe underqualified, but affordable, could actually be detrimental. So that's a case where waiting a little bit longer, either to secure funding or to increase revenues to the point or level that it's ready, but to really bring in not just the COO that's needed today, the COO that's going to be what's there to take the company where it needs to go. That can be really powerful. I think of a great example of this. I got to know at one point the first hired senior leader, first hired executive at Chewy.com. So the founders of Chewy.com had found the market. The company was exploding. They were hiring people and just throwing stuff and people into warehouses to try to get orders out. And they hired Stuart Horowitz, who was the chief people officer. He's the first hired executive. And Stuart came in and they couldn't really afford him yet, but they were growing so fast and the company was exploding in a way that it was very interesting for someone to be able to come in and say, okay, you can't afford me yet, but where you're going, you'll be able to afford me and then some. And I can be part of that growth plan and be able to take advantage, be part of that win. He was able to come in and really build the operating system and really the people system that was going to make that company thrive. And in less than 6 years, they were able to go public with a $5 billion valuation. So this is where they were able to be very successful very quickly by bringing in someone they weren't really quite ready for yet. But at the same time, it was clear that this was going to be the person that could get them there because they had the talent, the experience to do it.
So you made a powerful statement that I don't want people to miss. You said affordable but underqualified could be detrimental. Yeah. I don't want people to lose sight of that. That is so powerful. Affordable but underqualified could be detrimental. So not just finding someone that you could afford or just afford barely, but having someone that is fully qualified and can take on a strong number 2 position. So John, thank you so much for everything that you shared today. This is incredibly helpful. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to listen to this that need to hear this. I'm always amazed at some companies that I'll go into. They'll hire me for a strategic storytelling workshop, and I come in and I'm, teaching their senior leaders about internal communication and sales through storytelling, and I get to learn a little bit about the organization. And come to find out, some of them are definitely in that growth phase. They have a bunch of people, they're profitable, but they don't have a strong number 2. So I really challenge people listening to this to follow those steps that John outlined today. So number 1, you said, get out of your business, let go. And you need to focus on hiring that strong number 2. That was the first point that you mentioned. The second point is the CEO needs to empower, equip, and release the COO. I really appreciate that second point that you mentioned. And then the third and final point that I'm going to take away with me from this conversation is you said the COO needs to identify 5 to 10 people in the organization that they consider indispensable and figure out how to build out systems in the event that those people leave, so the business doesn't go under based on that knowledge. Yeah. So I appreciate those 3 points that you had mentioned, John. And hey, if anyone wants to get more information on you, they want to reach out to your services to help them in that growth phase, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
LinkedIn is the best place to reach me. You can get a little bit of information about my background, and you can reach out to me through a direct message, and I'll get back to you as quick as I can.
Perfect. I will include that in the show notes. People could just click and go from there. John, thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It was great to be back, Matt. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.